Okay, so today we're diving into a paper that's really making waves. It's all about that wild spike in global disasters we saw back in 2025. And according to this paper, it wasn't just climate change. No, it argues this was something intentional.
And this is the number at the heart of it all, 40%. The paper claims that after a very specific date, May 12, 2025, global disasters shot up by a staggering 40%. I mean, that's way beyond what any of the statistical models were predicting. It was such a huge anomaly that it practically screamed for an explanation.
All right, so here's our game plan for unpacking this. First, we'll look at the anomaly itself. Then we'll get into the big question. Was it climate change or climate war? After that, we'll dig into the actual disaster data, check out the supposed pattern of manipulation, and finally, we'll tackle the paper's most controversial part, its prophetic take on everything.
All right, first up, the anomaly. The author, Sixbert Sangwa, basically says the data from 2025 completely shatters all the existing models. The numbers just don't add up.
And you can see it right here. This chart uses data from what's known as the MDOT database. Look at the numbers. The average was hanging around 28 disasters a month in the 2010s, crept up to 34, but then, boom! Summer of 2025, it just skyrockets to an average of 51 a month. That's a massive leap.
Now, here's the kicker. The author is really clear on this point. He says they accounted for all the usual suspects, a strong El Niño, other natural climate cycles, but even after all that, this huge 40% surge was still there. It's this unexplained piece of the puzzle that the whole paper is built on.
So that leads us right into the paper's main hypothesis. If it's not natural variability, then what on earth is it? The author lays out two very different stories to explain what happened in 2025.
Okay, so you've got two competing narratives here. On the one hand, there's the mainstream view. We just hit a climate tipping point. Things got so bad that the system just snapped. But on the other hand, you have the paper's really explosive idea that this was a deliberate, orchestrated event. Basically, weather warfare. The whole point of the paper is to see which of these two ideas the data actually backs up.
And look, the author says the idea of weather warfare isn't just some sci-fi fantasy. He points to this UN treaty, EMOD, from way back in 1977. Its whole purpose is to ban this stuff. And, as the paper argues, you don't go around banning something unless you think it's a real threat.
And get this, the paper digs up this quote from a 1996 U.S. Air Force research paper. Weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. Think about that. The author presents this as a pretty chilling coincidence, right? The military was talking about owning the weather in 2025, decades before it happened.
Okay, so let's dig into the data itself. The author doesn't just look at the grand total. He actually breaks down the disasters by type, looking for a specific pattern that might point towards that orchestrated hypothesis.
And this is what he found. The surge wasn't just random. It was really concentrated in three specific areas. First, floods. They doubled their recent average. Second, storms. They were behaving weirdly, intensifying way faster than forecasts predicted. And third, heat waves, which were just completely off the charts. The paper's argument is that this kind of specificity looks more like targeted manipulation than a random natural event.
And to give you a sense of the human cost, the paper pulls out this number, 1,180. That's the number of excess deaths from heat just in Spain in only 2 months during that summer of 2025. That's a 10-fold increase from the year before. Just staggering.
And this wasn't just the author's analysis either. He cites the Spanish government itself, which officially called it an event of exceptional intensity, with unprecedented mortality. Even officials on the ground were saying they'd never seen anything like it.
Okay, so the numbers are weird. But what was actually happening in the world at that exact time? In this next section, the paper tries to line up that statistical spike with real-world events, looking for what it calls a suspicious pattern.
So the paper puts together this timeline and argues the timing is just too perfect to be a coincidence. It starts on May 12th, what the paper calls a covert inflection point. Right after that, the disaster starts surging. Then you see reports of a big increase in weather modification experiments, and that in turn leads to the UN calling for radical new measures to deal with the climate breakdown. It's presented as a very convenient sequence of events.
And he's not just making this up. The paper points to public records. For example, reports on weather modification filed in the U.S. literally tripled. The UAE was running huge numbers of cloud seeding flights, and China's massive weather control program was in full swing.
The argument here is that the global capacity to pull something like this off was already in place.
So this all leads to the author's big geopolitical theory. He says it's a classic case of problem-reaction solution. First, you create the problem, in this case the surge in disasters. That causes a public reaction. People are scared and they demand action. And that provides the justification for your pre-planned solution, which according to the paper is a set of accelerated global policies, a new world order that weakens individual nations.
All right, now we get to the final part of the paper, and this is where it takes a major turn. It moves away from data and geopolitics and dives headfirst into a very specific theological interpretation. The author argues there's a much deeper spiritual meaning to all of this.
At the heart of this final section is one core idea. Even if humans are manipulating the weather, they can only do it because God is allowing it to happen. So these disasters shouldn't be seen as a sign of human power. Instead, the author argues, they're a signal of God's own timing.
And it connects this directly to biblical prophecy. He pulls this verse from the book of Revelation, and it brings down fire from heaven to earth in front of people. The suggestion here is that modern technology, like weather weapons, could be used to create these huge, seemingly miraculous signs to deceive people and consolidate power under a future anti-God global system.
So to put it all together, here's the author's full prophetic framework. Step 1 is the deception. Engineered disasters get blamed on regular old climate change. Step 2 is the goal. Use the crisis to usher in a new world order. Step 3 is the sign. These events are a signal that the end times are approaching. And that leads to step 4, the response, a call for people to be vigilant, to have discernment, and to prepare for the rapture.
So, to be clear, the paper's final conclusion isn't that climate change is fake, not at all. The argument is that the reality of climate change is actually being used as the perfect cover story for a much more deliberate and sinister plan to create chaos and reshape the world.
And the paper closes with this verse from Matthew. Stay awake, because you do not know what day your Lord is coming. It's framed as one last call to action, not to fight politically, but to be spiritually aware and to really understand the times we're living in.
So in the end, the paper leaves us with this massive question. It's laid out this chain of evidence from hard data to scripture to make a really extraordinary claim. So, what do you think? Is all this extreme weather just a natural process? Is it a hidden weapon being used against us? Or could it be a signal of something else entirely?